Senior Military Observer, 4th Rank, Drathian Intelligence Division. I have spent 37 years watching theories collapse under the weight of reality. That is not bitterness. That is the job. When the High Council notified me that a contingent of 14 human cadets had been approved for Crucible admission, I did what any competent analyst would do. I accessed the full physiological database. I reviewed the endurance profiles, the pain attenuation studies, the documented panic response curves. I read the Karate after-action reports from the Tarsus Ridge engagement where human auxiliaries had fractured under sustained artillery pressure. I read the Volari tactical summaries describing human infantry as unpredictable in ways that were not complementary. Then I opened my assessment template and typed with efficient certainty, human cohort arrival anticipated. Recommend medical standby increase 25%. Recommend psychological support on call. Recommend observational period not to exceed 72 hours prior to standard exit processing. I was not nervous. I was not excited. I was professionally prepared to watch 14 fragile organisms discover the difference between planetary militia training and galactic combat standards. They arrived on a repurified supply hauler. No delegation. No ceremonial escort. Just 14 bodies stepping onto Velarath Prim receiving platform with the kind of quiet that immediately made me adjust my recording sensitivity. The first one off the ramp was a female named Sena Vall. Medium height. Hair pulled back with something that looked like a torn uniform sleeve. She did not look up at the binary suns. She did not roll her shoulders or stretch or perform any of the small rituals that every other species uses to settle their nerves upon arrival. She simply stood still for exactly 3 seconds, looked at the facility entrance, and started walking. Behind her came a male named Torvin Hale. His file noted 3 ground campaigns and a disciplinary citation for refusing to abandon wounded during a contested extraction. The citation was marked resolved with no further action, which in Drathian bureaucratic language means someone important decided the rules did not apply to that particular situation. Behind him came the one my manifest listed as Quen Radek. No previous military record. No listed specializations. Just a blank service history and a single line in the notes field, selected through alternative assessment protocol. I flagged that file for review and moved on. The observation gallery was already occupied by cadets from 5 other species. The Volari did their usual performance of exaggerated disinterest, while standing in configurations that maximized visible musculature. The Karate were whispering. A pair of Grellan cadets whose species processes threat through olfactory cues were visibly shifting their breathing patterns in a way my implant flagged as defensive anticipation. Nobody said anything. Nobody had to. Commander Vann runs this facility with a precision that borders on theological commitment. He is 6'11" of Volari military doctrine wrapped in scar tissue and a vocal delivery that never rises above conversational volume because it has never needed to. He has commanded here for 14 years. He has broken cadets from 11 species. He does not break them physically, though that happens. He breaks the part of them that believes wanting to survive is the same thing as being willing to fight. On the first morning, he stood on the command platform above the assembly hall with all 412 cadets arranged in precise formation below. The hall was silent in that specific way large spaces get silent when every person in them is performing calm and none of them believe it. Commander Vann looked at the assembled cadets for a long time before he spoke. When he spoke, his voice carried without effort. "You are here because your government submitted your names," he said. "That is not an endorsement. That is a lottery. Most of you will not finish this program. That is not a threat. That is a statistical observation based on 114 years of recorded outcomes." He walked the length of the platform slowly. "Fear," he continued, "is not the enemy of combat effectiveness. Fear is the currency. The question is not whether you feel it. The question is what you do during the interval between feeling it and acting. That interval is where soldiers die. That interval is where missions fail. That interval is what we measure here." He stopped walking. He looked directly at the human contingent. He did not point. He did not need to. "The human physiological response to threat," he said without heat, "produces one of the longest documented hesitation windows in galactic military data. Elevated cortisol. Prolonged sympathetic activation. Your own scientists call this fight or flight. What your own scientists do not emphasize is that the calculation phase consumes measurable time, time in which better adapted species have already moved. He let that settle. The hall was so quiet I could hear the atmospheric processors cycling. Not one human moved. Not one human spoke. Sena Vall was looking at Commander Vann with an expression I could not categorize. It was not defiance. It was not submission. It was the look of someone who has heard a description of themselves from someone who has never met them and is deciding whether to correct the record or simply let the speaker finish. I wrote in my initial report, human cohort received commander orientation without visible response, consistent with documented passive stress profiles. No immediate behavioral anomalies observed. I would delete that line within 48 hours. The second trial came on day 3. They called it the Gauntlet. A half-kilometer of variable environment chambers, each one designed to introduce a different combat stressor. Low visibility, acoustic disorientation, simulated ammunition scarcity. The objective was simple. Reach the end. The method was not specified because the method was what they were testing. Commander Vann stood at the start threshold. He did not explain the layout. He did not offer tactical advice. He simply opened the door and said, "First cadet to complete sets the pace for the cohort. There is no penalty for last place. There is no reward for first. Go when ready." The hesitation window opened. I had seen this pattern across 17 species. The calculation phase. The sideways glances. The silent negotiation of who would assume the initial risk. The Karate contingent began their usual ritual of murmured assessments. The Volari adjusted their posture in ways designed to imply readiness while committing to nothing. 3 seconds passed. 5 seconds. Sena Vall stepped forward. Not fast. Not slow. She stepped forward the way someone steps into whether they have already decided to walk through. She did not look back at her cohort. She did not make eye contact with Commander Vann. She walked through the threshold and into the first chamber, and the door closed behind her. I activated every observation feed I had. The first chamber was smoke and simulated shrapnel patterns. She moved through it at a pace that was not cautious and not reckless. She was counting. I saw her lips moving. She was counting steps, counting seconds, building a mental map of something she had never seen before. The second chamber introduced directional audio confusion, recorded enemy vocalizations from 3 angles. She ignored all of them. She kept counting. The third chamber was the one that mattered. A narrow corridor with automated targeting systems firing non-lethal kinetic rounds. The pattern was randomized but not fully random. There was a rhythm buried in the firing sequence. A half-second gap every 9th cycle. Most cadets found it by the 20th hit. Some never found it at all. Sena Vall found it on the 3rd hit. She took 2 rounds to the torso, adjusted her timing, and moved through the remaining 40 meters without another contact. She reached the end in 11 minutes and 43 seconds. That placed her 4th among all species in the trial. Not dominant. Not exceptional by the numbers. But she had gone first. She had gone first without the benefit of watching anyone else fail. The Karate cadet who finished 2nd in that trial, a decorated junior officer named Veskel, requested to see her route data after the debrief. I watched him study her movement patterns for 20 minutes. He asked no questions. He simply watched and rewound and watched again. On the 4th day, the trial format shifted. Team combat simulation. Mixed species squads assigned by random draw. The Crucible does this deliberately. Forced integration. Forced reliance on unfamiliar biology and unshared tactical language. The theory is simple. If you cannot fight beside someone whose respiratory system runs on different chemistry, you cannot fight in a galactic theater. Sena Vall was assigned to a squad with 2 Volari, 1 Karate, and a Grellan named Sorix, whose species communicates primarily through thermal signature modulation. The Volari immediately assumed squad lead. That is what Volari do. They do it without asking. They do it without checking whether anyone else had a better claim. The simulation dropped them into a reinforced structure with a hostage extraction objective. The Volari lead, a male named Thalen, issued rapid orders in a tone that expected no resistance. The Karate complied with visible resentment. The Grellan shifted temperature in patterns my implant flagged as stress. Sena Vall listened. Then she said, "The southern approach is a funnel." Thalen did not look at her. "I am aware." "Then you know 3 sentry positions have overlapping coverage there," she said. "We cannot suppress all 3 simultaneously with this squad's firepower." Thalen stopped. He turned. His expression was the specific face Valari make when a lower category species contradicts them in front of witnesses. "What is your alternative?" She walked to the tactical display. She pointed at a drainage maintenance shaft marked on the blueprint, but not included in the primary assault planning. "This runs under the southern approach. It exits inside the structure. 1 person through here. 4 persons suppressing from the north. The sentries will rotate coverage toward the larger force. The solo insertion moves while they are turned." Thalen stared at the display. "That shaft is rated for Grellan body width only." "Yes," Sena Vall said. The Grellan, Sorix, shifted to a thermal pattern my implant translated as acknowledgement. The simulation ran. Sorix moved through the shaft. The suppression team drew sentry fire. The extraction completed in 6 minutes. No simulated casualties. After the debrief, Thalen did not thank Sena Vall. He did not acknowledge her tactical contribution. But he stood near her during the next pre-trial assembly. Not interacting. Just near. Proximity to a pattern he was still trying to understand. I noted this in my report. I did not yet know what to do with it. The final trial arrived on day 7. They call it the breaking. The name is not metaphorical. A single cadet enters a pressure chamber with variable atmospheric composition, temperature drop, and sustained auditory stress. The objective is not combat. The objective is endurance. Stay conscious. Stay functional. Stay in the fight while your body sends every signal it has to stop. Commander Vann stood at the chamber entrance. The lot system would select the cadet. That was the rule. That had always been the rule. He reached into the container. Before his hand closed around a marker, Sena Vall stepped forward. "Sir, I volunteer." The hall went still. 411 cadets from 11 species held their breath in different biological rhythms. Commander Vann looked at her. His face gave nothing. But his hands stopped moving inside the container. "You understand this trial is not a combat simulation?" "Yes, sir." "You understand previous volunteers from other species have required medical extraction before completion?" "Yes, sir." She walked to the chamber. She did not look back at Torvin Hale or Quen Radek or any of the other humans. She stepped inside. The door sealed. The chamber cycled. Oxygen partial pressure dropped first. Then temperature. Then the sound began. Low frequency. Variable rhythm. Designed to disrupt concentration, to trigger autonomic stress responses, to remind the body that something was wrong. I watched the biological telemetry. Her heart rate climbed. Her respiratory efficiency degraded. The fear markers that Commander Vann had cited in his opening speech appeared exactly on schedule. Elevated cortisol. Prolonged sympathetic activation. All of it. She did not sit down. She did not curl toward the door. She stood in the center of the chamber with her arms loose at her sides and her eyes open, and she started counting again. I saw her lips move. 1, 2, 3. Not counting time. Counting something else. Counting her own breaths. Counting the gaps between heartbeats. Counting the space between the fear and whatever came next. Minute 3. Minute 5. Minute 7. The Karate cadet Beskal, the one who had studied her route data, leaned forward over the observation rail. His hands were gripping the barrier. He did not seem to notice he was doing it. Minute 9. The telemetry showed her oxygen saturation dropping below the safety threshold. The chamber automated systems did not stop the trial. The Crucible does not stop. The cadet stops or the cadet is removed. She did not stop. At 10 minutes and 22 seconds, she swayed. A single step to the left. Her hand touched the chamber wall. She corrected. She stood straight again. Commander Vann watched. He did not speak. He did not gesture. He watched the way someone watches a measurement they have taken 1,000 times suddenly produce a different number. At 12 minutes, the chamber systems automatically terminated the trial. Not because she requested it. because the atmospheric composition had reached the limit of what the safety protocol allowed for any cadet regardless of species. The door opened. Sena Vall walked out. She walked out without assistance. Her steps were precise. Her face was pale. Her eyes were clear. She stopped in front of Commander Vann. She did not speak. She did not need to. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Report to medical." "That is not a suggestion." "Yes, sir." She walked toward the medical bay. The hall parted around her. Valari stepped aside. Karati lowered their eyes. The Grellan shifted to a thermal pattern my implant had never recorded before. I sat at my station. I opened my original assessment document. The one with the 25% medical increase and the 72-hour exit prediction. I read it once. I read it twice. I deleted it. Then I opened a fresh report and typed the only thing that made sense. Previous classification of human species military potential requires immediate revision. Basis for revision. They do not wait for fear to pass. They do not wait for certainty. They do not wait for permission. They go. And when they cannot go further, they stand still until they can. I submitted the report. I leaned back in my chair. Somewhere in the cadet quarters, 14 humans were preparing for the next phase. And I was already writing the supplementary observations. The High Council responded within 14 standard hours. That never happens. Usually reports sit in review queues for days, sometimes weeks, while junior analysts argue about terminology and senior officers wait for political winds to shift. 14 hours meant someone had read my submission immediately and had not been able to set it aside. The response was classified above my normal clearance. I had to request a temporary elevation. That never happens either. The Council did not reject my reclassification recommendation. They did not approve it. They requested something else. Direct observation extension. Full immersion. They wanted me inside the human cohort's operational rhythm, not watching from behind reinforced glass. I sat with that request for 20 minutes. An observer of my rank does not embed. Observers watch. Observers document. Observers do not become part of the observed environment. That is not protocol. That is not professionalism. That is the entire foundation of objective intelligence gathering. I accepted the assignment. The human quarters were in Section 7, originally designed for Grellan physiology, which meant the temperature was warmer and the lighting was dimmer than standard. The humans had not requested adjustments. They had simply adapted. Sena Vall was sitting on a storage crate when I entered. She was not resting. She was studying a datapad showing the schematics for the next trial phase. She did not look up when I came in. "Observer," she said. Not a question. "Senior Observer, Kalen Boss," I said. "4th rank. Drathian Intelligence Division." "I know who you are," she said. "You have been watching us since we arrived. That is my function." She looked up then. Her eyes were tired. Not defeated. Tired the way a blade is tired after cutting through something that should have stopped it. "And what function brings you inside our quarters instead of behind the glass?" I hesitated. That is not something I do. Extended pause before verbal response is not in my behavioral profile, but I hesitated because I did not have a prepared answer and I had never entered an observation without one. The Council wants me to understand something I cannot see from the gallery. She set the datapad down. Then ask. Ask what? Ask whatever you came to ask. But understand something first. We are not here to prove anything to your Council. We are not here to revise your classification system. We are here because the Crucible has something we need and we have something it does not understand yet. That is the only transaction. I wrote nothing down. For the first time in 37 years, I did not take a note. Torvin Hale entered from the sleeping bay. He was moving carefully. His left side was wrapped under his uniform. The cracked rib from the endurance trial. He had still not reported it to medical staff. He looked at me. He looked at Sena Vall. He said nothing. He simply stood near the doorway in a position that had no tactical purpose I could immediately identify. But it had a purpose. I realized that later. He was positioning himself between me and the exit. Quen Radek came in last. The one with the blank service history. The alternative assessment. He did not look at me at all. He sat down in the corner and closed his eyes and began breathing in a slow pattern that my medical sensors registered as deliberate heart rate regulation. I stayed for 40 minutes. I asked 3 questions. Sena Vall answered 2 of them. She declined to answer the third. The question she declined was about Quen Radek's file. I returned to my station with more data than I knew how to process and a sensation I had not experienced in decades. Curiosity. Not analytical curiosity. Not the professional interest in anomalous data points. Something older. Something closer to the feeling that had first made me request this posting 11 years ago, before I had learned to replace wonder with methodology. I opened a new document. I stared at it. Then I wrote 1 line. I do not yet know what the humans are building, but I am certain they are building something. On the night before the full program enrollment, I accessed the restricted medical logs. Not the standard scan summaries. The deep tissue analysis. The cellular stress markers. The neurological fatigue indices. I was looking for evidence of deterioration. 11 days of Crucible trials on a species with documented physiological fragility should have produced measurable degradation. Should have produced flags. Should have produced the data that would justify my original assessment. The logs showed something else. The humans were not deteriorating. They were adapting. Their cortisol response curves were flattening, not because the trials were becoming less stressful. The trials were becoming more demanding. The flattening indicated neurological recalibration. Their bodies were learning to process threat without producing the hesitation window that every galactic military database had identified as a fixed biological constraint. I ran the numbers 3 times. I cross-referenced with every species profile in the Drathian database. No other species showed this pattern. Valari adaptation is linear. Karate adaptation plateaus after 6 days. Grellan adaptation does not occur at all within observable timeframes. Only the humans showed accelerating adaptation curves. Only the humans were getting faster at being afraid without stopping. I closed the logs. I sat in the dark. I thought about Quen Radek's blank service history. I thought about the alternative assessment protocol notation. I thought about Sena Vall's refusal to answer my question. Then I requested a secure channel to Drathian High Command. Not the Council. Command. The people who make operational decisions rather than policy recommendations. The channel opened at 0347 local time. A duty officer appeared on my display. I stated my name, my rank, and my request. I asked for any additional files on the human cohort. Not the standard interspecies data. The classified files. The ones the Council does not see because the Council is political and Command is not. The duty officer looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Stand by." I waited. 73 seconds. Long enough for him to check my clearance. Long enough to decide whether to route my request upward. Long enough to consider the consequences of refusing a senior observer with 37 years of unblemished service. The file arrived. It was not large. It contained 3 entries. First entry. Human colony world designated Kessler's fall. 10 years ago. Pirate incursion. Civilian population 47,000. Galactic Relief Forces estimated arrival time 14 days. No military garrison present. The colony organized its own defense using civilian volunteers with no formal training. Second entry. The volunteers held for 12 days. Casualty rate 73%. The remaining 27% continued fighting. No surrender. No retreat. The relief forces arrived to find the pirate force fully neutralized, and the surviving volunteers still defending positions that no longer needed defending. Third entry. Among the surviving volunteers from Kessler's fall were 3 individuals whose names later appeared on military recruitment rosters. Their service records were scrubbed of colony origin data. Their physiological profiles were flagged for alternative assessment. Their names were Sena Vall, Torvin Hale, Quen Radek. I closed the file. I understood now what the Crucible was seeing, what Commander Vann had begun to suspect, what the other species cadets were positioning themselves near without understanding why. The humans were not learning to be soldiers at this facility. They had been soldiers before they arrived. They had been something else too. Something the databases had no category for. I opened my report document. I typed the final observation of the night. They do not break because they have already broken. They kept going anyway. That is not combat training. That is not psychological conditioning. That is something the Crucible has never measured because the Crucible has never encountered it before. I saved the document. I did not submit it. Not yet. The full program enrollment begins tomorrow. And I have the distinct professional certainty that everything I have observed so far was only the opening phase. The full program enrollment ceremony took place in the assembly hall. Same space as the first morning. Same commander on the platform. Same mix of species standing in precise rows. But everything had shifted. The air felt different. The silence was not the silence of nervous performance. It was the silence of beings who had watched something rewrite their understanding of what was possible. Commander Vann stood at the center of the platform. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. 412 cadets began this orientation phase, he said. 389 remain. That is a higher retention rate than any cohort in the past 7 years. He paused. Some of you exceeded our projections. Some of you changed our projections entirely. He looked directly at the human contingent. Sena Vall stood at the front of their formation. Torvin Hale was beside her. Quen Radek was at the back, his arms loose, his expression unreadable. The commander continued. The Crucible has operated for 114 years under a set of assumptions about combat effectiveness. About fear. About the relationship between physiological response and tactical action. Some of those assumptions require revision. He did not say the humans had caused that revision. He did not need to. The Volari cadets knew. The Karate knew. The Grellan shifted thermal patterns that my implant now recognized as acknowledgement of a new hierarchical reality. Commander Vann stepped down from the platform. He walked through the formation. He stopped in front of Sena Vall. He extended his hand. Not a salute. Not a gesture of authority. An offer of recognition between professionals. She took it. She did not smile. She did not perform gratitude. She simply held his grip for the appropriate duration and released. Commander Vann turned to address the hall one final time. Full program enrollment begins at 0600 tomorrow. The trials will escalate. The margin for error will shrink. Some of you will not complete this course. That is not a failure of the Crucible. That is the cost of standards. Dismissed. The formation dispersed. Species separated into their usual clusters. But something had changed in the way they moved around the humans. More space. More attention. More of the specific body language that beings use when they are near something they respect but do not yet understand. I returned to my station. I sat down. I pulled up my original assessment document one last time. The one with the medical increase recommendation. The early exit protocols. The prepare for short posting. I did not delete it again. I filed it as a historical record of incorrect methodology. That is the professional thing to do. Keep the errors visible. Let them teach whoever comes next. Then I open a new document. I typed the heading. Supplementary observations. Human cohort. Full program. I wrote the first line. The Crucible was built to test theories. The humans arrived with a different assignment. They came to test the Crucible. I leaned back. Through my observation window, I could see Section 7 quarters. The lights were still on. The humans were not resting. They were preparing. They were always preparing. I have 37 years of service remaining before mandatory retirement. That once felt like a long time. Now it feels like exactly enough time to watch what happens next. And I intend to watch very closely. The story does not end here. The trials continue. The humans continue. And somewhere in the depths of the Drathian Intelligence Division archives, my original incorrect assessment will sit alongside every other confident prediction that reality chose not to honor. That is not failure. That is the job. Senior Observer Kalen Voss. 4th rank. Still watching. Still learning. Still wrong about humans exactly once. Never again.